The hell the Los Angeles Lakers think they going with a bunch of white dudes? Your three top players are white dudes? Really? This ain't golf. This ain't baseball. Hell, it ain't even soccer. What y'all think this is? Basketball. In NBA history.
Stephen A. Smith is facing the fiercest backlash of his career. The man behind a 5-year, $100 million-plus contract with ESPN, the face of First Take, arguably the highest-paid personality in the history of sports television, just said something that has the entire sports world questioning whether his job is actually safe. And if you saw what came out of his mouth on July 1, 2026, you already know why. Here's what happened. The Los Angeles Lakers had just reshaped their roster, pairing Luka Doncic and Austin Reeves with newly acquired center Walker Kessler, fresh off a sign-and-trade from the Utah Jazz. When Stephen A. Smith sat down in front of his camera to react, he didn't talk about defensive schemes or playoff seeding. He looked straight into the lens and asked where exactly the Lakers thought they were going with, in his words, a bunch of white dudes leading the roster. He didn't stop there. He went further, saying he couldn't recall a single era in NBA history where 3 white players carried a team to a championship, framing it as a simple basketball observation that somebody had to say. That clip ignited a firestorm unlike anything sports media had seen in years. It ripped across the internet within hours. Former NFL linebacker Emmanuel Acho called the comment flat-out racist, arguing that Smith didn't have the credibility to accuse others of playing the race card while doing exactly that himself. Commentator Bomani Jones piled on with his own jab about the roster's complexion. Fans split down the middle. Some accused ESPN of a glaring double standard, pointing out that a white analyst making the same comment about a black-led roster would likely be fired within the hour. Others defended Smith, saying he was simply stating an uncomfortable basketball truth. What started as a roster debate turned into a nationwide conversation about race, double standards in sports media, and whether the industry's most powerful voice had finally gone too far. In early 2000s, it was obvious Stephen A. Smith wasn't built for print. He was built for the camera. His first major run at ESPN came in the mid-2000s, hosting Quite Frankly with Stephen A. Smith, a show built entirely around his opinions and his voice. ESPN didn't renew that contract in 2009, reportedly because his style clashed with the direction executives wanted for their programming. He landed briefly at Fox Sports Radio before a new wave of ESPN executives, who understood exactly what the internet age was about to demand, brought him back. Paired with Skip Bayless on First Take, something clicked. Argument became entertainment. Opinion became appointment television. Stephen A. Smith became, without much argument, the most recognizable face in sports commentary, generating more social media traffic than almost any other program on television. He was everywhere. NBA Countdown, SportsCenter, radio, YouTube, podcast. In March 2025, ESPN confirmed a new multi-year extension worth well over $100 million, pushing his annual salary into the range of $20 million or more. Separately, he'd already signed a 3-year, $36 million deal with SiriusXM, hosting the Stephen A. Smith Show, and launched a political talk program called Straight Shooter with Stephen A. By that fall, reports had his total annual earnings pushing close to $40 million across all platforms. That's the man at the center of this story, a broadcaster who had built something no sports commentator had ever built before. That wasn't a coincidence. It was identity. That history became a cultural truth that shaped how millions of fans understood the Lakers brand. The purple and gold meant something specific that went beyond wins and losses. So when LeBron James left the franchise in the summer of 2026, and the roster began rebuilding around a very different kind of core, the basketball world was already watching closely. What came next handed Stephen A. Smith exactly the moment he needed. The Lakers had a, really? This ain't golf. This ain't baseball. We've got a whole lot of brothers on Team USA. This is basketball. What y'all think this is? Here's what Smith was actually arguing, and it's the part most coverage glossed over. His point was rooted in the Lakers' championship history. Every one of the franchise's 17 titles had been built around a black superstar at the center of it. Kareem's dominance in the post, Magic's playmaking, Shaq's sheer physical force, Kobe's competitiveness, LeBron's all-around greatness. Smith was pointing to that pattern and asking whether a franchise defined by it for 6 decades could suddenly win by abandoning it entirely. His reference to Team USA was a nod to a broader reality, that the best basketball talent in the world has, for decades, disproportionately come from black athletes. His underlying claim was that the Lakers were now betting on a roster profile their own championship history had never supported. That was the basketball argument. But the specific words he chose, and the racial framing wrapped around them, guaranteed that almost nobody would hear it that way. This is where things get complicated, because the same voice that has spent years calling out racial bias in NFL coaching hires and quarterback evaluations was now using race as the lens to question whether a group of players could win at all. That contradiction didn't go unnoticed by the people paying closest attention. Before getting into the backlash, it's worth sitting with Smith's actual perspective for a second, because dismissing it outright misses something real. Throughout his career, Smith has argued that race shapes outcomes in professional sports in ways the industry often refuses to admit. He pushed for years on the shortage of black head coaches in the NFL. He raised hard questions about whether black quarterbacks were evaluated fairly at the draft level. He made those arguments loudly, repeatedly, and often against real institutional pushback. So, why'd that ESPN would have already fired Smith if a white commentator had said this about black athletes. That single post pulled in hundreds of thousands of impressions overnight and became the spark for the "is his job actually in danger" narrative that would dominate sports media for the next several days. And the backlash wasn't limited to anonymous accounts. Emmanuel Acho, the former NFL linebacker turned prominent media voice, was about to weigh in directly, and his response would turn this from an online firestorm into a real reckoning over what Smith had said. Emmanuel Acho, on his Speak Easy series, delivered some of the sharpest criticism Smith received from anyone. Acho, who is black himself, argued that Smith had done the exact thing he'd spent years accusing others of doing. "Stephen ain't nobody had to say that," Acho said, acknowledging Smith's standing as one of the most astute basketball minds in the sport's history, but arguing he'd collapsed a basketball discussion into a racial generalization that had no place there. "You don't have the luxury of crying out racism and then turning around and making a racist remark yourself. We don't get that luxury," Acho said. Sports media personality Robin Lundberg added that the line might have worked as a passing joke, but became a real problem the moment Smith elevated it into serious championship analysis. Former ESPN commentator Bomani Jones, who separately joked that the Lakers haven't been this white since they left Minneapolis, showed how the same basic observation could land completely differently depending on how it was framed. Jones treated it as a historical footnote. Smith treated it as a verdict. That difference mattered enormously. Podcasts across sports media picked up the story within 24 hours. YouTube channels were pulling in hundreds of thousands of views by Thursday morning. The controversy had completely eclipsed the actual basketball news. LeBron entering free agency, the Lakers Maki. ESPN's relationship with Smith has always come down to one commercial reality. He makes the network money. He drives ratings. He generates the exact kind of controversy that turns into conversation, which turns into viewership. A company doesn't hand someone a contract in the neighborhood of $100 million and then cut them loose because a clip from their personal podcast made people angry online. That's simply not how the business works. History shows sports broadcasting doesn't typically forgive personalities who lose their platforms over racially charged remarks. But Emmanuel Acho, on his Speak Easy series, delivered some of the sharpest criticism Smith received from anyone. Acho, who is black himself, argued that Smith had done the exact thing he'd spent years accusing others of doing. "Stephen ain't nobody had to say that," Acho said, acknowledging Smith's standing as one of the most astute basketball minds in the sport's history, but arguing he'd collapsed a basketball discussion into a racial generalization that had no place there. "You don't have the luxury of crying out racism and then turning around and making a racist remark yourself. We don't get that luxury," Acho said. Sports media personality Robin Lundberg added that the line might have worked as a passing joke, but became a real problem the moment Smith elevated it into serious championship analysis. Former ESPN commentator Bomani Jones, who separately joked that the Lakers haven't been this white since they left Minneapolis, showed how the same basic observation could land completely differently depending on how it was framed. Jones treated it as a historical footnote. Smith treated it as a verdict. That difference mattered enormously. Podcasts across sports media picked up the story within 24 hours. YouTube channels were pulling in hundreds of thousands of views by Thursday morning. The controversy had completely eclipsed the actual basketball news. LeBron entering free agency. The Lakers' Maki. Disappear cleanly. It raised real questions about accountability in sports media that remain unanswered, about whether the standards applied to commentary on race depend on who's speaking and who they're speaking about, and about whether a personality as powerful as Smith operates under the same rules as everyone else in the industry. Those questions will follow the next controversy, and there will be a next one because that's the nature of the platform he's built. Over the coming months, Smith faces a sports media landscape watching him differently than it was on June 30th. Rivals who kept their criticism professional may feel emboldened. Journalists who avoided the harder pieces about his influence now have a clear reason to write them. Athletes who've quietly resented his platform may be less hesitant to say so publicly. And that April SiriusXM rant, where he warned his enemies they'd regret coming for him, has been replayed so many times alongside this controversy that it's permanently fused to his public image. He told the world that losing ESPN would unleash him, intentionally or not. He handed his critics a preview of exactly what removing his guardrails might look like. For ESPN, the calculus is purely financial. Jimmy Pitaro, the network's chairman, said when Smith's contract was announced that he's a difference maker, and that fans are captivated by his sports knowledge, his opinions, and his flair. That statement wasn't written for calm moments. It was written for exactly this kind of moment, ready to be pulled out as institutional cover when the network's most valuable personality does something that makes everyone uncomfortable. ESPN knew who they were signing. They knew the controversies would come, and that some would be worse than others. They signed him anyway because the attention he generates, even deeply uncomfortable attention, is worth more to the business than the silence his absence would leave behind. For sports media as an industry,